Welcome back, everyone. It's hour 2 of Middays on this Monday. Short show for you today. Ricky Matthews of Super Talk Outdoors that comes your way at 12:05. Right now, it's Mississippi Congressman Michael Guest. He represents the 3rd District. Congressman, good to see you. Thanks for coming on.
Good morning, Gerard. Good to talk to you again.
Yeah, man. So, a lot of stuff going on up there in the Capitol. What do you think about the president's actions with respect to blockading the strait there in Iran? Unfortunately, our vice president, J.D. Vance, and others that were sent on behalf of this country by the president to negotiate with the regime spent 21 hours and didn't come away with a deal.
Yeah. I think that it's clear, that Iran refuses to negotiate the two most important parts of this process, which is one, that they give up their nuclear program, and two, that they open up the Strait of Hormuz for all traffic to pass through unimpeded. The other points, I think, from reports that I've read, they were able to make progress on the other points. But look, we know that it has been the position of this nation for many presidents now that Iran not be allowed to obtain a nuclear weapon. That is what precipitated the operation in the Middle East. And as long as Iran refuses to give up their nuclear program, I think you're going to see this president's going to use military action. He's going to use economic leverage. He's going to use everything that he can to get them to the table to where they will actually negotiate and to be able to reach an agreement that then can be enforced. What we don't want is another agreement like we saw entered into between the United States and other nations during the Obama administration, an agreement that ultimately would have allowed Iran to obtain a nuclear weapon. So I think this is the next step forward. I think the president's going to continue to keep pressure on Iran. He's trying to use now economic pressure, but I think, that there is a possibility that military activity will resume in the Middle East once the ceasefire ends roughly a week from now.
He's made it very clear that the requirement is that they totally abandon their nuclear ambitions, that's the reason why we went in. He did an extensive interview over the weekend with Maria Bartiromo. I caught it. He said that's the reason we went in, quite simply, and it is the key objective of our mission. And until we get to that point, the operation continues.
Yeah, and look, the president, unlike other former commanders-in-chief, he's not going to back down off of that. He's not going to allow Iran to continue to stall for time. He's going to keep the pressure on this regime to make sure that they are no longer a threat to the area and that they are not in the process of developing a nuclear weapon. And so I support the president. I support the president in his actions to again, make sure that the objections are carried out. And I think the president will use every tool at his disposal to make that happen.
Yeah, it feels like it at this point as well. So, Congressman, you, of course, represent the great state of Mississippi in the role of chairman of the House Ethics Committee. You got a member there in the body that might have some problems, that being Representative Eric Swalwell, who now says he is removing himself. He announced that in the race for governor of California. Lots of allegations of sexual misconduct and so forth. What do you expect to happen with respect to his seat in Congress there?
We announced, the Ethics Committee announced today that we were opening an investigation into Mr. Swalwell. Most of these allegations really just surfaced over the last 3 or 4 days. And so the announcement was made today that the Ethics Committee is going to begin an investigation. This investigation will kind of dovetail into the investigation that's currently ongoing. Similar allegations against Representative Tony Gonzalez from the state of Texas, and then also kind of goes along with what the Ethics Committee has been doing in the case of Representative McCormick from the state of Florida. And so there have been reports that individual members may file motions to expel these members. They have the right to do so. Those are what are called privilege motions, which means unless they are tabled or referred back to the committee of jurisdiction, which would be the ethics committee, that they would be able to receive votes. I think it's 48 hours once you make a motion privileged. That motion has to come to the floor. And so it is possible that we could be voting this week to expel members of Congress. We last did that when Representative George Santos of New York, he was expelled by the body after an ethics investigation issued a report and issued our findings as to the misspending of campaign funds, the general untruthfulness that Mr. Santos and really to some extent almost fraud that he relied on to be able to be elected to be a member of Congress. But, look, expulsion is extremely rare.
Yeah.
We, being Congress, there have only been 6 members expelled since the Civil War. So 3 of those because they fought for the Confederacy in the Civil War, 2 other members who were actually convicted of crimes by courts and then refused to resign. And then the first member of any recency that has been removed without a conviction was Mr. Santos. And so when people look at this, this is an extremely rare occurrence. Some people may say it shouldn't have taken this long. We should have already moved forward with some of these expulsions. And look, I want to make sure that that we are, as a body, that we are policing ourselves any way that we can. But it does appear that there will be motions that will be filed on Tuesday to expel, I believe, both Mr. Santos and also Tony Gonzalez, and then there may be motions renewed to remove Ms. McCormick and then Representative Mills from the state of Florida.
Wow.
So it could be a very interesting week as far as internally within the House body as we look to deal with probably 2, but possibly as many as 4 expulsion motions brought to the floor this week.
Wow. Okay. Well, this is going to be interesting for sure. And it's one of those things that, honestly, I think most Americans just wish we didn't even have to mess with. But when you have a member that, I guess, brings discredit and dishonor to the body, you have to act.
Yeah, and look, historically, Gerard, what we've seen is members who are in these situations, they have chosen to resign. And once a member resigns, then there's no reason to move forward on a motion to expel. But I think in the political world that we live in, where things are so partisan, where people don't want to admit that they've done something wrong, I think you're going to probably see expulsion become something that is more common in the House of Representatives. I think there is growing support from what I'm reading online for expulsion in some of these matters. I know on the McCormick case, that is a case where the Ethics Committee met shortly before our Easter recess. We found that that there was proof that she had violated House rules in 23 of the 25 charges that were brought by the investigative subcommittee. We found that there was proof that those allegations were proven. We'll be moving into a sanctions hearing next week. Assuming that this matter is not taken up before the body this week, we will have an open hearing in which we will hear testimony from staff from the Ethics Committee as well as Ms. McCormick's counsel, and then the Ethics Committee will then make a finding as to what sanctions, if any, should be imposed in that case. And so that case is one that has worked its way through. We are there kind of at the tail end of the ethics process. But ethics processes are kind of like criminal investigations. I mean, a lot of times these things don't you're not able to just go out and make a finding immediately. You have to gather evidence. You have to interview witnesses. And so that's one of the reasons that matter has not come to conclusion yet. But it will either be likely coming to the floor this week, or there will be a recommendation from the full ethics committee when we meet on the 21st.
Gotcha. All right, great explanation. Appreciate that. We got a break right now. Can you hang with us? We got some other stuff to talk about.
Yes, sir. We'd love to.
Got it. We got Congressman Michael Guest on the line with us. Stay with us. Welcome back, everyone. It's middays from the Element Wealth studio. We're visiting with Congressman Michael Guest. He represents, of course, Mississippi's 3rd Congressional District. So, Congressman, what's on the calendar? When you guys going back to work there in the House, and what are you going to be working on?
So I will actually be flying up early tomorrow morning, Gerard. I'll be on the 6 a.m. direct flight leaving out of Jackson. And so next week, we already talked about the possibility that we will be dealing with member conduct, possibly moving to expel members. We are also looking at DHS funding. DHS funding now continues to drag on. The president has alleviated some of the pressure points by his executive order, but we still have to deal with DHS funding. There is a divide between Republicans and Democrats as to how we're going to fund that agency. And then, even some disagreement between the House and Senate. The Senate proposed the legislation before we left for Easter recess that would have funded all but 2 agencies, that being CBP and ICE. Those agencies would then be funded or backfilled through a budget reconciliation 2.0. So we're going to be in Washington having those discussions. FISA renewal is coming up this week, so that will be another major piece of legislation that we will be trying to get across the finish line. So it's been nice to be home for 2 weeks, to spend some time with family, to be in Mississippi, to travel the district. But we've got a lot of work to do when we get back. And also with me serving on the Appropriations Committee, we are beginning the appropriations process for FY27. So I've got a busy week ahead. Once I return to Washington tomorrow morning, I've already been kind of preparing today as for some of the hearings and some of the meetings that I'll be in next week, or later this week and next week.
Gotcha. Busy calendar set up, it sounds like, for sure. This prospect of a Reconciliation 2.0 really intrigued me, Congressman. Did a little research on what that might include. Just kind of check this out with you. Possibility of eliminating the estate tax altogether, indexing capital gains for inflation. These would be some huge tax reforms.
Yeah, a couple different options are out there, Gerard. One is to do a limited 2.0 reconciliation that would deal with ICE, CBP, DHS funding, and then try to do actually a reconciliation 3.0 that would encompass some of the items that you discussed. But there's also talk that, hey, we just need to put them all in one single bill. And so at this point, whether it's going to be limited, which is what the president has asked for, again, limited to DHS funding on this reconciliation, with us then trying to get a third reconciliation bill across the finish line between now and the end of the year. Those discussions are still ongoing. But look, I think it's important that as Republicans have the majority in the House, have the majority in the Senate, that we control the White House, that we use every tool at our disposal to push forward good policy, to try to circumvent the filibuster, which is why the reconciliation process is so important, because it does allow us to do that. It does allow Republicans to pass legislation without having to get the 60 votes normally needed in the Senate. And look, I think people want to know that we're working on their behalf. As we're getting ready, coming into the midterms, when people are saying, hey, what are you doing to help us with spending? What are you trying to do to help us with tax relief? I think it's important that we talk about things that we're doing now, not things that we did last year.
Yeah, I agree. Everybody's forward-looking, and it is, you well know, it's a "what have you done for me lately" world. It doesn't matter if it's business or politics. That's just the way the cycles work in our society these days. But I think this is good news, perhaps taking another bite at the reconciliation apple and trying to get some additional tax reforms through. And speaking of which, what are you hearing from your constituents with respect to the positive surprise, I guess, to those that maybe weren't tracking it that closely, of having increased refunds this tax season?
Yeah, I think people are just now really starting to see the impact of that the prior reconciliation, the one big beautiful bill, as the president called it, how it was going to impact them personally, how it was going to impact them financially. And look, that was a major win for the president and a major win for conservatives. We locked in lower tax rates for every American making $12,000 or less, or excuse me, $12,000 or more. We kept the standard deduction and the child tax credit from being slashed in half. We created additional deductions for seniors, those individuals who work hourly and are paid by overtime, those people who earn their income by way of tips. And so some of those people are now are very surprised when they get their tax statement back and they see that they are in line for a much greater refund than they ever imagined. And so it's good to see that we're able to do something that helps Americans keep more of their hard-earned money. But you're right. We don't need to just rest there. We need to continue to move forward in a reconciliation 2.0 or 3.0 to extend that into other areas. But look, the president's tax cut is going to help a huge number of Americans, a huge number of Mississippians, and I'm glad that I had the opportunity to vote for it in Congress.
Yeah, absolutely. The presidential war powers, Congressman, there were a couple of resolutions, were there not, in the Congress to perhaps limit the president's power here with these attacks on Iran. What do you think about that? Where'd you stand on that?
At this point, I am not in favor of limiting the president's power. Look, we don't have troops on the ground. At this point, we are in the middle of a ceasefire. There are no hostilities going on between the U.S. and Iran. I think this is Democrats wanting to micromanage the president on this matter. I think that at this point that a war powers resolution is not needed. And if a war powers resolution comes back to the floor this week, I would not be supportive of it. Now, if the Democrats, as the situation continues to go on, if there end up being plans, long-term plans to put boots on the ground, things of that nature, I think at that point you may have a rightness issue, and that may be the time for that to be considered by the House and Senate. But look, there's no hostilities. There's a ceasefire that is ongoing. We do not have boots on the ground. And so I think for us at this point to be talking about war powers, trying to limit the president's authority, I think that would be harmful to Americans if we are going to continue to negotiate with Iran, if we're going to get them to concede not to develop a nuclear weapon and open the strait. We do not need to be having war powers resolutions tying the president's hand and binding his authority.
Okay. All right. So we got midterms coming up. What's your outlook? What does your crystal ball say?
Look, I think it's still too early to tell. I think the main issue that people are going to be focused on are going to be the economy, cost of living. And look, prior to the operation in the Middle East, we had some great economic numbers that we could tout to the American public about the fact that we were really seeing a resurgence in the economy. We saw inflation, which was as high as 9% under Biden-Harris. It had dropped to roughly 2.5% under President Trump. We saw the Dow Jones at 50,000. We saw gas prices at a 5-year low. We saw $10 trillion in new investment that had been announced. The third quarter GDP was up to 4.5%. So we started to see mortgage rates come down as well as interest rates. And so the economy was really moving in the right direction. Since the war in Iran, we know that we have seen gas prices spike. We have seen a rise in inflation, but if you look at core inflation, if you take out the cost associated with fuel, core inflation is still low. We had some good unemployment numbers that came in last month. I think we added 178,000 new jobs. We know that fourth quarter GDP was only up 0.5%, but I think a lot of that, Gerard, was tied to the fact that we had a government shutdown.
Yeah.
And some of the CBO studies said that they believe that the impact of that government shutdown could have lowered that GDP by as much as 2%. And so we know that there was somewhere between probably a 10 to $20 billion impact on the economy because of the government shutdown. So again, we had good numbers going into the conflict. I hope once the conflict ends, and I hope it ends quickly, that we will see a resurgence of that good economic news. But I think the economy is going to be the driver going forward in the November election.
Yeah, I totally agree and appreciate your analysis. And I always appreciate you coming on Middays, Congressman Michael Guest. Thanks a lot. We'll be talking to you soon, probably next time from Washington.
Thank you, Gerard. Have a great day.
You too. Coming right back in the Element Wealth studio.